So there I was, getting arrested in my own driveway by two fake cops while HOA President Karen Blackwood stood there grinning like she'd just won the lottery. Picture this. Tuesday morning, I'm standing in handcuffs on my perfectly manicured lawn while my neighbors peek through their blinds, watching what they think is my public humiliation. The metal cuts into my wrists as these two clowns in knockoff police uniforms march me toward their unmarked SUV. Karen's clipboard gleams in the morning sun like a weapon of mass destruction. What she doesn't know is that I'm a retired federal investigator, and I've been building a case against her criminal enterprise for 3 months. In exactly 47 minutes, her little power trip is going to cost her everything, including a federal prison sentence that'll make her wish she'd never heard of homeowners associations. But first, what would you do if some power-hungry neighbor tried to destroy your life over property you legally own? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because this revenge story is about to get biblical. Let me paint you the picture of how this nightmare started, because what happened next will make your blood boil with righteous fury. My name is Marcus Donovan, and 6 months ago, my wife Elena and I thought we'd finally escape the rat race. After 25 years of chasing white-collar criminals through corporate boardrooms and offshore bank accounts, I'd earned my quiet retirement. We bought our dream house in Willowbrook Springs, one of those picture-perfect neighborhoods where every lawn looks like a golf course, and the HOA dues cost more than most people's mortgage payments. Elena's a retired prosecutor who specialized in racketeering cases. I'm the guy who used to track money laundering schemes through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Together, we'd put some seriously dangerous people behind bars. We thought our biggest worry would be whether to plant roses or hydrangeas in the front yard. The house came with 3 acres of pristine Colorado mountain land, complete with a natural creek that's been running through the property since before Colorado was even a state. My great-grandfather bought this land in 1923 for $800. The deed is older than most of the trees. It's grandfathered into every zoning law ever written. It's bulletproof legal ownership that predates any HOA by 70 years. Elena and I spent our first month unpacking boxes, setting up my workshop in the barn, and watching deer come down to drink from the creek every evening at sunset. The silence was golden. No phones ringing with crisis calls, no emergency briefings at dawn, just peace, quiet, and the satisfaction of work well done. Then Karen Blackwood entered our lives like a tornado made of legal documents and synthetic authority. She's 58 years old, HOA president for 7 years, former real estate broker, and the kind of woman who would complain about the color of your roses because they clash with her vision of community standards. She drives a white Lexus SUV that's always spotless and has this predatory smile that makes your skin crawl like you're being measured for a coffin. Karen has perfected the art of manufacturing emergencies to feel important. She creates crises where none exist, then swoops in to solve problems she invented. It's textbook narcissistic control behavior wrapped in the veneer of community service. The first violation notice appeared on a Tuesday morning, tucked under the windshield wiper of Elena's car like a parking ticket from hell. Bright yellow paper with bold red lettering that screamed, "Immediate compliance required." The violation was spectacular in its absurdity. Our creek, the one that's been flowing through this property since the last ice age, apparently violated Section 7.3 of the Community Water Management Guidelines. It was creating an unauthorized water feature without proper permits. The fine was $2,000, payable within 72 hours, or face additional penalties including possible foreclosure proceedings. I read the notice twice, then showed it to Elena. She read it with the same expression she used to reserve for obviously perjured testimony. We both started laughing at the same time. Someone was trying to fine us for a creek that existed before the neighborhood, before the HOA, before Karen Blackwood was even born. It was like getting a speeding ticket for the speed of light or a noise violation for the sound of wind through trees. The audacity was breathtaking. The legal ignorance was staggering. This woman was either completely delusional or running some kind of elaborate scam. Elena's prosecutorial instincts kicked in immediately. She wanted to march over to Karen's house and explain property law using small words and visual aids. I suggested a different approach. In my experience, people who manufacture authority usually have something to hide. They create noise to distract from their own criminal behavior. Before we played our hand, I wanted to know exactly who we were dealing with and what kind of operation she was really running. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse, that beautiful old building where public records sleep in fireproof cabinets and truth lives in black ink on white paper. I asked the clerk for incorporation documents and filed covenants for any homeowners association operating in our zip code. The search came back empty. No registered HOA, no filed articles of incorporation, no legal entity with the authority to regulate anything, let alone fine anyone. Karen Blackwood's Homeowners Association existed only in her imagination and on the letterhead she'd printed at Kinko's. But I didn't stop there. I pulled property records for every house in the neighborhood. I traced ownership histories back 50 years. I found zoning maps and easement agreements and water rights documentation that painted a crystal clear picture. Our entire subdivision was zoned single-family residential with no covenant restrictions, no architectural review boards, no community standards committees, no legal mechanism for anyone to fine anyone else for anything. Karen Blackwood had created a completely fictional organization and was using it to extort money from her neighbors. The scope of her operation became clear as I dug deeper into public records. She'd been filing fake liens against properties whose owners couldn't or wouldn't pay her invented fines. She'd forced at least 3 families to sell their homes and move away to avoid what they thought were legitimate legal proceedings. She'd collected tens of thousands of dollars in fraudulent penalties over the past 7 years. This wasn't just harassment. This was organized theft disguised as community management. It was racketeering under color of law. It was federal crime territory. I drove home with a folder full of certified documents that proved Karen Blackwood was running a criminal enterprise. But I didn't confront her. I didn't show the evidence to my neighbors. Instead, I did what I'd learned to do during 25 years of federal investigations. I started building an airtight case that would put her away for a very long time. I was going to let her escalate. I was going to give her enough rope to hang herself and anyone else involved in her scheme. Elena and I turned our peaceful retirement home into a tactical command center. We installed high-definition security cameras with night vision and audio recording capabilities. We set up motion sensors that would alert us whenever anyone approached our property. I dug out some old surveillance equipment from my federal days, including a button microphone that could record crystal-clear audio from 50 feet away, and a GPS tracking device small enough to hide under a fingernail. We prepared for war using the tools of law enforcement professionals. The beauty of catching criminals is that they always escalate. They can't help themselves. Success makes them arrogant. Arrogance makes them sloppy. Sloppy criminals make fatal mistakes. Karen Blackwood was about to make the biggest mistake of her life, and I was going to record every second of it. The second violation notice arrived 4 days later, this time delivered by hand. I watched through my kitchen window as Karen walked up our driveway in her spotless white sneakers, carrying her clipboard like a badge of office. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged, never been questioned, never been told no by anyone brave enough to stand up to her manufactured authority. She tucked the notice under our front door, took a photo of our house with her phone, and made several notes on her clipboard before walking back to her Lexus and driving away. This notice was for our vegetable garden. Elena had planted tomatoes, peppers, and herbs in a small plot behind our house, completely invisible from any public road or neighboring property. According to Karen's latest legal fiction, agricultural activities violated residential zoning requirements and created potential pest management issues for the broader community. The fine was $3,500. The timeline for compliance was 48 hours. The threatened consequences included property seizure and criminal prosecution for zoning violations. Elena read the notice and her prosecutor's instincts turned predatory. She wanted to call the state attorney general immediately. She wanted to file charges for fraud, extortion, and impersonation of legal authority. She wanted to destroy Karen Blackwood using the full weight of the criminal justice system. I talked her out of it. Karen was small-time. She was local. She was a single-person operation running a crude scam against people who didn't know any better. But the fake police officers she'd hired to arrest me, that was federal territory. That was the kind of crime that attracts serious attention from serious people with serious resources. I called my former partner at the FBI, a methodical man named David Chen, who specializes in organized crime and white-collar fraud. I explained the situation in broad strokes: fake HOA, fraudulent fines, forged legal documents, intimidation tactics escalating toward what appeared to be impersonation of law enforcement officers. David listened without interrupting, the way he always did when something interesting crossed his desk. When I finished, there was a long pause before he spoke. "Marcus," he said, "you've stumbled into something bigger than you realize. We've been tracking a network of fake HOA scams across 7 states. The pattern is always the same. Someone sets up a bogus Homeowners Association, starts fining people for imaginary violations, then escalates to fake legal proceedings when victims don't pay. We think there's a central organization teaching this method and providing resources like forged documents and corrupt officials. Your Karen might be a franchise operation." David's words sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just one delusional neighbor with delusions of grandeur. This was organized crime using HOA fraud as a revenue stream. Karen Blackwood wasn't just stealing from her neighbors. She was part of a criminal network that was stealing from neighborhoods across the country. The stakes had just multiplied exponentially. "Can you work with us on this?" David asked, unofficially at first, then formally once we establish federal jurisdiction. "We need someone inside the operation, someone with investigative experience who can document the entire criminal enterprise from the ground up." Your retirement just got a lot more interesting. I looked out my kitchen window at Elena, tending her illegal vegetable garden, while deer grazed peacefully in the meadow beyond our creek. Our quiet mountain paradise had just become the front lines of a federal investigation. But some battles choose you, some fights are worth having, some criminals need to be stopped before they destroy more lives. 3 weeks later, I was standing in handcuffs on my own property, while Karen Blackwood savored what she thought was her greatest victory. She had no idea she was starring in a federal sting operation that would unravel her entire criminal network. She had no idea that every word she spoke was being recorded by multiple law enforcement agencies. She had no idea that the retired federal investigator she was trying to intimidate had spent his career taking down criminals 1,000 times more dangerous than her pathetic little HOA scam. The 2 fake police officers who arrested me were beautiful specimens of criminal stupidity. They wore surplus store uniforms with badges they had bought on eBay. Their handcuffs were theatrical props from a costume shop. Their arrest warrant was a work of fiction that misspelled the word warrant in the header. They demanded to see identification while standing on private property without probable cause or legal authority. They threatened me with imprisonment for violations that didn't exist under laws that had never been written. They committed multiple felonies in front of witnesses while being recorded by federal surveillance equipment. As they marched me toward their SUV, I pressed the panic button hidden in my wedding ring. The signal went directly to David Chen's task force command center, where a team of federal agents was monitoring the operation in real time. Within seconds, unmarked vehicles were moving into position around the neighborhood. Karen Blackwood's criminal empire was about to experience its own personal apocalypse. The fake officers loaded me into the back of their SUV, but we never made it out of the subdivision. 3 blocks from my house, we found ourselves surrounded by federal agents in full tactical gear. The transformation was spectacular. 2 amateur criminals who thought they were in control of the situation suddenly faced the reality of what actual law enforcement looks like when it's angry. Karen Blackwood was arrested at her kitchen table while counting the money she'd extorted from her neighbors over the past month. The search warrant covered her house, her car, her storage units, and her bank accounts. Federal agents found evidence of fraud spanning 7 years and targeting over 200 families across multiple states. They found forged court documents, fake liens, counterfeit legal notices, and detailed records of every criminal transaction she'd conducted. Her computer contained email correspondence with other fake HOA operators and a how-to manual for running neighborhood extortion schemes. The final tally was staggering. Karen Blackwood and her network had stolen over $800,000 from families who thought they were paying legitimate Homeowners Association fees. They'd forced 47 families to sell their homes and relocate to avoid what they believed were valid legal proceedings. They'd filed hundreds of fraudulent liens that destroyed credit ratings and prevented property sales. They'd impersonated government officials, forged legal documents, and operated a criminal conspiracy that crossed state lines and lasted nearly a decade. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Karen Blackwood was convicted on 43 federal counts, including racketeering, mail fraud, wire fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit organized crime. She was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. Her co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 8 to 15 years. The fake police officers who arrested me received additional charges for impersonating federal officers and assault under color of law. But the real victory wasn't Karen's prison sentence. It was watching our neighborhood come back to life. Families moved back into houses they'd been forced to abandon. Property values recovered as fraudulent liens were removed. Children started playing in yards that had been off limits under Karen's invented regulations. The natural creek that started this whole adventure continues to flow through our property, just as it has for thousands of years before Karen Blackwood existed, and as it will for thousands of years after her criminal legacy is forgotten. Elena and I are still enjoying our retirement, though it turned out to be more exciting than we'd planned. We've become unofficial consultants for federal task forces investigating HOA fraud across the country. We've helped expose 12 other criminal operations and recovered over $2 million for victims who thought they'd never see justice. Our quiet mountain paradise has become a training ground for law enforcement officers learning to recognize and prosecute neighborhood-level organized crime. The lesson here isn't complicated. Real authority comes from legitimate sources and operates within established legal frameworks. Fake authority relies on intimidation, manufactured urgency, and the assumption that victims won't fight back. When someone tries to fine you for a creek that's older than the Constitution, when someone threatens to foreclose on property they don't control, when someone impersonates law enforcement to enforce rules that don't exist, you're not dealing with a homeowners association. You're dealing with organized crime disguised as community management. Knowledge is power, but applied knowledge is justice. These criminals count on people being afraid to challenge authority, even obviously fake authority. They exploit the assumption that official-looking documents must be legitimate. They weaponize people's desire to avoid conflict and follow rules. But when good people stand up to bullies with facts, evidence, and real legal authority, the bullies always lose. And that justice tastes sweeter than any victory garden Elena has ever grown. The morning air carried the scent of pine needles and fresh coffee when Karen made her next move, 3 days after what she thought was her greatest victory. I was sitting on my porch, watching Elena water her supposedly illegal vegetable garden when I spotted Karen's white Lexus creeping down our street like a predator hunting wounded prey. She parked directly across from our driveway, got out with her clipboard, and started photographing our property from multiple angles. Each camera click was another nail in her own coffin, another piece of evidence for the federal task force that was building an ironclad case against her criminal organization. Elena noticed her immediately. She stood up slowly from her tomato plants, garden hose still in her hand, and stared directly at Karen with the cold, calculating expression she used to reserve for hostile witnesses during cross-examination. Karen stared back, her face displaying pure smugness. She thought she was documenting evidence of ongoing violations. She had absolutely no idea she was creating a permanent record of criminal stalking and harassment that would be played in federal court to a jury of her peers. "Watch this," Elena said quietly, loud enough for my button microphone to pick up clearly. She walked to the edge of our property, staying carefully on our side of the property line, and turned the garden hose on full pressure. She began watering the roses that grew along our fence, creating a spectacular rainbow mist in the morning sunlight. It was beautiful, perfectly legal, and completely within our rights as property owners. It also happened to send a crystal-clear message about what we thought of Karen's surveillance activities. Karen's face turned multiple shades of red with fury. She marched across the street, her designer heels clicking on the asphalt like castanets announcing the arrival of her own personal doom. She stopped just short of our property line, close enough to shout, but not close enough to commit criminal trespass. At least she had retained that much sense. "This is harassment," she screamed, waving her clipboard like a battle flag torn from some suburban battlefield. "I'm documenting everything for my attorneys. You people have no respect for community standards or common decency. Your criminal behavior ends today. Mark my words. Elena smiled the predatory smile that had terrified white-collar criminals from Denver to Washington, D.C. Criminal behavior, she asked, her voice honey-sweet and diamond-sharp. Would you care to explain exactly which crimes we've committed by watering our own flowers on our own property with our own water? Karen's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air on a dock. She'd spent so many years terrorizing people who were afraid to challenge her manufactured authority that she'd forgotten how to deal with someone who fought back with facts and logic. She was so accustomed to winning through intimidation that she had no strategy for handling opponents who weren't intimidated by her theatrical displays of power. The unauthorized water feature, Karen finally sputtered, pointing at our creek with a trembling finger that looked like it was conducting some invisible orchestra of stupidity. The unpermitted agricultural activities, the failure to comply with architectural review standards. The violations are numerous and ongoing, and I will not tolerate this defiance of established community regulations. Elena's smile grew wider and more dangerous. Established by whom, she asked, in that perfectly reasonable prosecutorial tone that had destroyed countless criminals on witness stands. Under what legal authority, filed with which government agency, enforced through what judicial process? These are simple questions, Karen. If you're going to threaten people with legal action, you should probably understand the law. The beauty of Elena's prosecutorial training was that she could dismantle an opponent's credibility using nothing but perfectly reasonable questions. She wasn't shouting or making threats. She was simply asking Karen to explain the legal foundation for her claims. It was like watching a master surgeon perform an operation with a scalpel made of pure logic and sharpened by decades of courtroom experience. Karen's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a particularly unattractive purple that clashed horribly with her white blazer. "You'll be hearing from my attorneys," she hissed through gritted teeth. "This conversation is over." She spun on her heel and stalked back to her car, her clipboard clutched against her chest like armor that might protect her from the brutal reality of actual law. As Karen drove away with more anger than skill, Elena turned to me with the satisfied expression of a prosecutor who'd just gotten a key admission from a hostile witness. Did you see her face when I asked about legal authority? She knows she doesn't have any. She knows this whole operation is fraudulent. She's running scared now. 3 days later, we received our answer about Karen's attorneys. A nervous-looking process server appeared at our front door with a manila envelope containing the most impressive work of legal fiction I'd ever seen outside of a Hollywood movie about corrupt lawyers. Karen had filed a restraining order against us in county court, claiming that we were threatening her safety and engaging in criminal harassment. The supporting documentation included photographs of Elena watering flowers, transcripts of our conversation that had been edited to remove all of Karen's threats, and sworn affidavits from witnesses whose names I didn't recognize, but whose signatures looked suspiciously similar to Karen's handwriting. Elena read through the filing with the methodical attention to detail that had made her famous among defense attorneys who dreaded facing her in court. "This is beautiful," she said finally. "Absolutely beautiful craftsmanship. Every single statement in this document is either a lie, a distortion, or a complete fabrication. She's committed perjury about 15 times on the first page alone. This woman has no idea how deep a hole she's digging for herself." The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday in front of Judge Margaret Patterson, a no-nonsense woman with 30 years on the bench and a well-earned reputation for despising frivolous litigation and obvious attempts to abuse the court system. Elena and I showed up with our own attorney, a sharp young civil rights lawyer named Michael Torres, who specialized in constitutional violations and government overreach. Karen appeared with her legal team, 2 expensive-looking men in $1,000 suits who radiated the kind of confidence that comes from never having been challenged by anyone who understood the law better than they did. Karen took the stand first, her voice trembling with what she probably thought was righteous indignation, but sounded more like barely controlled hysteria. She testified that we had threatened her life, destroyed her property, and created a hostile environment that made her afraid to leave her own home. She claimed that our creek was polluting the groundwater, and that our vegetable garden was attracting dangerous wildlife into the neighborhood. She insisted that our refusal to pay legitimate HOA fines was part of a broader pattern of criminal behavior that threatened the safety and stability of the entire community. Her performance was Academy Award worthy, complete with carefully timed tears and dramatic pauses for emotional impact, designed to manipulate the judge's sympathies. The problem was that everything she said was either demonstrably false or completely irrelevant to the legal standards for issuing a restraining order. Judge Patterson listened with the patient expression of someone who'd heard every possible variation of courtroom fiction over the course of 3 decades and developed a finely tuned sense for detecting complete nonsense. When Elena took the stand, she methodically dismantled every claim Karen had made with the precision of a demolition expert bringing down a condemned building. She presented the county records showing that no HOA existed for our neighborhood. She introduced the property deeds proving that our creek predated any zoning restrictions by nearly a century. She played audio recordings of Karen's threats and displayed photographs of the forged legal documents Karen had sent us. Most importantly, she showed Judge Patterson the federal investigation files that documented Karen's criminal activities across multiple states and revealed the scope of her fraudulent operation. The hearing lasted 6 grueling hours. By the end, Karen's attorneys were visibly uncomfortable, and Judge Patterson was visibly annoyed with having her time wasted by obvious legal theater. The restraining order was not only denied, it was dismissed with prejudice, meaning Karen could never file the same claims again. Judge Patterson also issued a stern warning that any future frivolous filings would result in sanctions for both Karen and her legal team, who should have known better than to bring such obvious garbage into her courtroom. But the real fireworks came after the hearing, when federal agents arrested Karen in the courthouse parking lot. She was walking to her car, probably planning to celebrate what she assumed would be another victory over neighbors too intimidated to fight back, when David Chen and his team surrounded her with the quiet efficiency of professionals who'd performed this exact dance 1,000 times before. "Karen Blackwood," David said, his voice calm and official as winter morning frost. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit mail fraud, wire fraud, racketeering, and extortion. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Do you understand these rights as I've explained them to you?" The color drained from Karen's face as the handcuffs clicked into place. Real handcuffs this time, not the theatrical props her hired goons had used on me. Real federal agents, not costume store imposters pretending to be law enforcement. Real charges that carried real prison time, not the imaginary violations she'd been manufacturing to terrorize her neighbors for years. The search of Karen's property began immediately after her arrest. Federal agents with properly executed warrants descended on her house like a swarm of methodical locusts, cataloging every piece of evidence that would be used to convict her and dismantle her criminal organization. They found boxes of blank violation notices, templates for forged legal documents, and detailed records of every family she'd targeted over the past 7 years of criminal activity. In her basement, agents discovered Karen's command center, a room that looked like the headquarters of a military operation designed to wage war against suburban tranquility. Maps of different neighborhoods covered the walls, with individual houses marked in different colors to indicate the status of her extortion campaigns. Red dots meant active targets who were paying regular fines. Yellow dots meant potential targets who had been identified but not yet contacted. Black dots meant families who had been successfully driven from their homes through fraudulent legal proceedings and manufactured crises. The scope of her operation was absolutely staggering. Karen had been running fake HOA scams in 17 different neighborhoods across 4 states. She'd collected over $900,000 in fraudulent fines and forced 63 families to sell their homes to avoid what they believed were legitimate legal proceedings. She'd filed hundreds of false liens that had destroyed credit ratings and prevented property sales. She'd impersonated government officials, forged court documents, and created a network of corrupt accomplices that included fake attorneys, counterfeit process servers, and the 2 theatrical police officers who'd arrested me. The federal investigation revealed that Karen's operation was part of a larger criminal network that taught HOA fraud techniques and provided resources for setting up fake homeowners associations. The organization operated like a franchise system, with experienced scammers training newcomers in exchange for a percentage of their criminal profits. They had standardized templates for forged documents, scripts for intimidating homeowners, and detailed guides for avoiding detection by real law enforcement agencies. Karen's trial became a federal showcase for prosecuting organized crime disguised as community management. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses were credible, and the criminal pattern was undeniable. Karen's defense team tried to portray her as a well-meaning community volunteer who had gotten carried away with enforcement activities. But the prosecution methodically demonstrated that every aspect of her operation had been carefully planned and deliberately criminal. The testimonies of her victims were absolutely heartbreaking. Elderly couples who had been forced to sell homes they had lived in for decades. Young families who had their credit destroyed by fraudulent liens. Military veterans who had been targeted specifically because Karen assumed they would be too busy with deployment schedules to fight back. Working-class families who had scraped together life savings to pay fines for violations that had never existed under laws that had never been written. One particularly devastating witness was Margaret Foster, an 84-year-old widow who had been forced to move into a nursing home after Karen's organization convinced her that her house was going to be seized for unpaid HOA fines. Margaret had lived in the same house for 57 years, raised 4 children there, buried her husband from the front porch, and watched her grandchildren take their first steps in the living room. Karen's organization had stolen her life savings and destroyed her family legacy for violations that existed only in their criminal imagination. Another witness was Captain James Rodriguez, a decorated Marine who had been serving overseas when Karen's organization began targeting his family. His wife had been terrorized with fake legal proceedings while he was deployed in Afghanistan, unable to protect his family from criminals who specifically targeted military families because they knew service members couldn't be physically present to defend their homes. The trial lasted 8 weeks. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Karen Blackwood was convicted on all 47 federal counts, including racketeering, conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud, extortion, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. She was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole, followed by 5 years of supervised release and a lifetime ban on any involvement with homeowners associations or property management activities. Her co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 8 to 18 years, depending on their level of involvement and cooperation with federal investigators. The fake police officers who had arrested me received additional charges for impersonating federal officers and assault under color of law. Their sentences included 15 years in federal prison and lifetime prohibition from owning firearms or working in any law enforcement capacity. The financial penalties were equally devastating. Karen was ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, totaling over $2 million when interest and damages were included. All of her assets were forfeited, including her house, her car, her bank accounts, and even her precious clipboard. The properties would be sold and the proceeds distributed to families whose lives had been destroyed by her criminal organization. But the most satisfying moment of the entire ordeal came during Karen's sentencing hearing when Judge Patterson delivered her final judgment. "Miss Blackwood," the judge said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority, "you have spent years terrorizing innocent families for your own financial gain. You have perverted the concept of community service and used the trust of your neighbors as a weapon against them. You have stolen money, destroyed credit ratings, and forced people from their homes using fabricated authority and forged documents." Judge Patterson paused, her gaze fixed on Karen's face with laser intensity. "Your crimes represent a particularly despicable form of theft because you didn't just steal money. You stole peace of mind. You stole security. You stole the fundamental American right to feel safe in one's own home. You have shown no remorse, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and no understanding of the suffering you have caused. This court hereby sentences you to 22 years in federal custody, during which time you will have ample opportunity to consider the difference between legitimate authority and criminal fraud." The aftermath was swift and thorough. Every fraudulent lien Karen had filed was voided by court order. Every family that had been forced to sell their homes received compensation for their losses. The fake legal documents were expunged from public records. The credit ratings that had been destroyed were restored. The network of criminals who had learned Karen's techniques was systematically identified and prosecuted by federal task forces operating in 12 different states. The congressional hearings that followed the prosecution brought national attention to the problem of HOA fraud and led to significant legislative reforms. Elena and I were called to testify before the House Subcommittee on Consumer Protection about the need for stronger regulations governing homeowners associations and property management companies. Our testimony helped shape new federal legislation requiring HOAs to register with state agencies and undergo regular audits of their financial activities. The new laws also established clear penalties for individuals who impersonate legal authority or create fake government documents. The legislation included provisions for victim compensation funds and mandated training for law enforcement agencies on how to recognize and investigate HOA fraud schemes. The legal framework we helped create has since been used to prosecute hundreds of similar operations across the country. Our neighborhood underwent a remarkable transformation that went far beyond simply removing Karen's criminal influence. Families moved back into houses they had been forced to abandon. Children started playing in yards that had been off limits under Karen's invented regulations. But more importantly, the community developed a new sense of solidarity and mutual support that came from surviving a shared trauma and fighting back against criminal exploitation. We organized regular neighborhood meetings where residents could share information about suspicious activities and learn to recognize the warning signs of HOA fraud. These meetings became a model for other communities dealing with similar problems. We developed educational materials that were distributed by law enforcement agencies and consumer protection organizations throughout the region. The natural creek that had started this entire adventure became a symbol of resistance against manufactured authority. We installed a small plaque near the water, explaining that the creek had been flowing freely for thousands of years before any human claimed the authority to regulate its existence. The plaque served as a reminder that some things are more important and more permanent than the petty tyrannies that small-minded people try to impose on their neighbors. Elena's supposedly illegal vegetable garden became a neighborhood gathering place where families could share gardening tips, children could learn about growing their own food, and everyone could enjoy the satisfaction of productive work that benefited the community. The garden grew every year, eventually encompassing several neighboring properties whose owners wanted to participate in something positive and constructive. The legal precedents established by Karen's prosecution have been cited in hundreds of subsequent cases involving HOA fraud, neighborhood scams, and abuse of manufactured authority. Law schools now use our case as a teaching example of how ordinary citizens can fight back against sophisticated criminal enterprises using patience, documentation, and legitimate legal resources. Elena and I discovered that retirement could be both peaceful and purposeful in ways we had never imagined. We became unofficial consultants for federal task forces investigating HOA fraud across the country. We helped develop training materials for law enforcement agencies, learning to recognize neighborhood-level organized crime. We testified before congressional committees about the need for stronger regulations governing homeowners associations and property management companies. The speaking engagements and consultation work allowed us to meet victims from across the country who had suffered similar experiences with fake HOAs and manufactured authority. Their stories were heartbreaking, but also inspiring. We learned about elderly couples who had fought back against criminal organizations trying to steal their homes. We met military families who had organized community resistance against predators targeting deployed service members. We connected with young families who had exposed corrupt property management companies stealing from their neighbors. These connections led to the formation of a national advocacy organization dedicated to supporting victims of HOA fraud and educating communities about the warning signs of criminal activity disguised as community management. The organization provides legal resources, connects victims with experienced attorneys, and maintains a database of known criminal organizations operating fake HOAs across the country. The educational programs we developed have been implemented in hundreds of communities nationwide. The programs teach residents how to verify the legitimacy of homeowners associations, how to recognize forged legal documents, and how to report suspicious activities to appropriate law enforcement agencies. The programs also provide emotional support for victims who have been traumatized by criminal organizations exploiting community trust. The experience taught us valuable lessons about the nature of authority, the importance of challenging obvious fraud, and the power of ordinary citizens to fight back against criminals who exploit trust and community spirit for personal gain. Real authority operates within established legal frameworks and submits to oversight by legitimate government agencies. Fake authority relies on intimidation, manufactured urgency, and the assumption that victims will be too afraid or confused to fight back. Most importantly, we learned that knowledge truly is power when it's applied correctly and shared generously with others who need protection from criminal exploitation. Karen's entire criminal organization collapsed the moment someone with investigative experience decided to fact-check her claims and document her criminal activities. Her victims hadn't been stupid or gullible. They had simply trusted that official-looking documents represented legitimate authority, and that community leaders were actually working for the benefit of the community. The lesson applies far beyond HOA fraud to any situation where someone claims authority they cannot legitimately demonstrate. Whenever someone demands immediate payment for violations, you don't understand. Whenever someone threatens legal action without providing proper documentation, whenever someone claims authority over your property or activities without clear legal standing, the appropriate response is not compliance. The appropriate response is verification through legitimate channels and documentation of all interactions with suspicious individuals or organizations. The technology tools we use to document Karen's criminal activities have become standard equipment for homeowners dealing with suspicious HOA activities. Security cameras, audio recording devices, and GPS tracking systems are now commonly used by residents who suspect they are being targeted by criminal organizations. The evidence these tools provide has been crucial in prosecuting dozens of fake HOA operations across the country. The National HOA Fraud Prevention Database we helped establish now contains detailed information about over 500 confirmed fake HOA operations that have been prosecuted in federal courts. The database includes photographs of known criminals, copies of forged documents they commonly use, and detailed descriptions of their tactics and targeting strategies. Law enforcement agencies across the country use this database to identify and investigate suspicious homeowners association activities in their jurisdictions. The training program Elena and I developed for federal agents has become the standard curriculum for investigating neighborhood-level organized crime. The program includes modules on recognizing forged legal documents, understanding the psychology of HOA fraud victims, and building cases that will result in successful prosecutions. Over 300 federal agents have completed the training program, and many of them have gone on to lead successful prosecutions of fake HOA operations in their own regions. The documentary film about our case premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was subsequently acquired by Netflix for national distribution. The film follows our story from the first violation notice through Karen's sentencing, including interviews with victims, law enforcement officials, and legal experts. The documentary has been viewed by over 10 million people and has generated thousands of reports from victims of similar schemes who had previously been too afraid or embarrassed to come forward. The memoir Elena and I co-authored became a bestseller and has been translated into 12 languages. The book provides a detailed account of our experience fighting Karen's criminal organization, along with practical advice for homeowners who suspect they are being targeted by fake HOA operations. The proceeds from book sales fund a scholarship program for children whose families were victimized by HOA fraud schemes. The Karen Blackwood case has become required reading in law schools across the country for courses on organized crime, white-collar prosecution, and victim advocacy. Legal scholars have written dozens of academic papers analyzing the case and its implications for future prosecution of similar schemes. The case is frequently cited in judicial opinions involving questions of manufactured authority and community-level fraud. 5 years after Karen's conviction, we received an unexpected visitor at our mountain home. Special Agent Rodriguez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had driven up from Denver to update us on a case that had grown out of our original investigation. The fake HOA training manual that Karen had been selling to criminals across the country had led to the discovery of an international criminal network operating in the United States, Canada, Mexico, and several European countries. The international investigation had revealed that fake HOA fraud was just one component of a larger criminal enterprise that included identity theft, insurance fraud, and real estate manipulation schemes. The organization had been generating hundreds of millions of dollars in criminal revenue by exploiting community trust and bureaucratic complexity in suburban neighborhoods around the world. Our case had provided the initial thread that federal investigators followed to unravel a criminal network that spanned multiple continents. Agent Rodriguez showed us surveillance photographs of luxury homes, expensive cars, and private jets that had been purchased with money stolen from families who thought they were paying legitimate Homeowners Association fees. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering. What had started as Karen's local neighborhood scam had revealed a sophisticated international operation that treated suburban communities as revenue sources to be systematically exploited. The international prosecutions that followed involved coordination between law enforcement agencies in 14 countries and resulted in the arrests of over 200 individuals involved in various aspects of the criminal network. The total amount of money recovered for victims exceeded $50 million, making it one of the largest financial crime recoveries in FBI history. The psychological research inspired by Karen's case has led to important discoveries about how criminal organizations exploit community trust and social authority. Dr. Patricia Williams, the trauma specialist who testified at Karen's trial, has published groundbreaking research on the long-term effects of manufactured authority fraud on victims and communities. Her work has influenced treatment approaches for trauma victims and has informed prevention strategies used by community organizations. The legal reforms that grew out of our case have been adopted by 47 states and have led to the prosecution of hundreds of additional fake HOA operations. The reforms require homeowners associations to register with state agencies, undergo regular financial audits, and maintain transparent records of their activities. Individuals who impersonate legal authority or create fake government documents now face enhanced federal penalties that can include up to 25 years in prison. The community resilience model we developed in our neighborhood has been replicated in hundreds of communities across the country. The model emphasizes neighbor-to-neighbor communication, shared resources for verifying suspicious activities, and coordinated responses to potential criminal threats. Communities that have implemented the model report significantly lower rates of fraud, victimization, and higher levels of social cohesion and mutual support. Elena's vegetable garden has grown into a community food forest that spans several acres and involves families from throughout the region. The project has become a model for sustainable community development and has attracted visitors from universities, government agencies, and international development organizations. The food forest produces thousands of pounds of fresh vegetables, fruits, and herbs each year, all of which are distributed free to families in need. The creek that started our adventure with Karen has been designated as a protected waterway by the state of Colorado, ensuring that it will continue to flow freely for future generations. The designation came about because our legal battle had drawn attention to the creek's ecological importance and its role in supporting wildlife habitat in the region. Environmental scientists now use the creek as a research site for studying mountain watershed ecology. The annual Justice Day celebration in our neighborhood has become a regional event that attracts thousands of visitors each year. The celebration includes educational workshops about fraud prevention, legal resources for crime victims, and community-building activities that strengthen social bonds and mutual support networks. Local law enforcement agencies use the event to connect with community members and build trust between residents and legitimate authority figures. The scholarship program we established with settlement money from Karen's prosecution has provided college funding for over 100 students whose families were victimized by HOA fraud schemes. The scholarship recipients have gone on to careers in law enforcement, legal advocacy, community organizing, and social work. Many of them have dedicated their professional lives to protecting other families from the kinds of criminal exploitation their own families experienced. The financial recovery process for Karen's victims took several years, but ultimately provided substantial compensation for both direct losses and emotional damages. The forfeiture of Karen's assets provided immediate funds for victim compensation, while civil lawsuits against banks and credit agencies that had enforced fraudulent liens provided additional recovery. Insurance settlements for emotional distress and credit damage added further compensation for families whose lives had been disrupted by Karen's criminal activities. The peer support network we established for HOA fraud victims has grown into a national organization with chapters in every state. The organization provides emotional support, legal resources, and practical assistance for families dealing with fake HOA operations. The network has been instrumental in identifying new criminal schemes and connecting victims with experienced attorneys who specialize in HOA fraud cases. The educational curriculum we developed for schools has been adopted by hundreds of school districts nationwide. The curriculum teaches students about civic engagement, legitimate authority structures, and the importance of verifying official claims before complying with demands for money or compliance. Students who complete the curriculum are better prepared to recognize and resist fraudulent authority claims throughout their lives. 10 years after Karen's conviction, Elena and I were invited to speak at the United Nations about international cooperation in combating transnational organized crime. Our presentation focused on how local criminal schemes can reveal global criminal networks and the importance of sharing information between law enforcement agencies in different countries. The UN has since adopted protocols based on our recommendations for tracking and prosecuting international fraud networks. The technology innovations that grew out of our case have revolutionized how law enforcement agencies investigate financial crimes involving forged documents and manufactured authority. Artificial intelligence systems can now detect forged legal documents with over 99% accuracy, and blockchain technology provides tamper-proof verification of legitimate government records. These innovations have made it much more difficult for criminals to create convincing forgeries of official documents. The victim advocacy training program Elena developed has been implemented by prosecutors' offices in all 50 states. The program teaches prosecutors how to work effectively with fraud victims who have been traumatized by systematic harassment and manufactured authority abuse. Prosecutors who complete the training are better equipped to build strong cases while providing appropriate support for victims who may be reluctant to testify or who have been psychologically damaged by their experiences. The research foundation we established uses Karen's case as a starting point for studying how criminal organizations exploit social trust and community institutions. The foundation has funded dozens of research projects that have improved understanding of white-collar crime, community-level fraud, and the psychological factors that make individuals vulnerable to criminal exploitation. The research has informed prevention strategies, treatment approaches, and law enforcement techniques. Bullies with clipboards only win when good people stay silent and isolated from each other. They count on fear, confusion, and the desire to avoid conflict to prevent their victims from organizing effective resistance. They exploit the assumption that official-looking paperwork must be legitimate and that community leaders are automatically trustworthy. But when good people stand up with facts, evidence, and real legal authority supported by strong community networks and effective communication systems, the bullies always lose. And that victory creates ripple effects that protect countless other families from similar criminal exploitation. The victory tastes sweeter than any vegetable Elena has ever grown in her supposedly illegal garden, sweeter than the mountain air that carries the scent of pine needles and justice, sweeter than the sound of children playing freely in yards that were once patrolled by criminal organizations, pretending to enforce community standards. The creek still flows exactly as it has for thousands of years, indifferent to the criminal schemes of people who thought they could claim authority over forces of nature and legitimate property rights. Remember, sometimes standing up to neighborhood tyrants doesn't just save yourself, it saves everyone around you. When good people refuse to be intimidated by fake authority, entire communities can break free from fear. Thanks for watching HOA Revenge Stories, where we prove that every HOA Karen eventually meets their match.